Good morning, folks. This is Randy with Snap Judgments. I'm coming to you with a guest this morning, Anthony Russo, fellow podcaster with the Draft Professors, who is going to come. We're going to talk about the combine today. We touched kind of basic, kind of like generally on it yesterday. Some overall thoughts, and we're going to talk about specific players today. Um, some comps, some stuff to watch for at the combine, etc. We're going to talk about offensive skill positions. We'll touch on the quarterback real quickly. That's not real consequential to us up here in New England, but I know Anthony, as a Jets fan, has an active interest in the quarterback class. Um, We'll talk about running backs. We'll talk about wide receivers. That's probably going to be the biggest group we'll touch on today. And then we're going to talk about tight ends as well. Before we get going, though, two quick news topics to touch on. First, there's the horrific Rhode Island shooting at the hockey rink. Real close to home for me, obviously. I live here in Providence. I have a friend whose wife and kid were at that game. I have another friend who's close friends with the family that was affected. So awful, awful stuff. Thoughts and prayers and all that out to them. Um, just you know, just a moment to kind of recognize that. I don't know if you have anything to chime in on that, Anthony.
No, I mean, yeah, just a horrible situation. Unfortunately, we've seen too many of these kinds of things happen. So yeah, thoughts and prayers absolutely for the obviously the shooting victims and the people that were at that game. It's a traumatic event for sure. So yes,
Yeah,
my deepest condolences to everyone there for sure.
some wild video coming out of that too. Two guys in the crowd that like tackled him. It's just heroic
Yes.
stuff. Really, it's you got to look at the flip side and talk about the guys that do the saving versus the guy that melted down and had the issue there. But speaking of guys who tend to melt down and have public issues, the Tyreek Hill was recently released by the Miami Dolphins. I didn't really touch on this yesterday because I kind of had everything that I was going to talk about laid out, and I'm not sure that I don't remember exactly when the news came out. Anyway, point being, I have seen a number of Patriots fans speculating about the possibility of adding Tyreek Hill to the Patriots. And let me just be emphatically clear that I do not think Tyreek Hill needs to be mentioned in the same sentence as the Patriots. He is possibly the worst human being in professional sports. I think he is probably the worst human being in the NFL. He has a long and sordid history of domestic violence dating back to his days in college, which led to him going undrafted. He was arrested then for domestic assault and battery by strangulation. He moved on to punching a 3-year-old child later on in his Kansas City career. He has since then been uh, sued, had settlements, been investigated for, and had allegations of various domestic violence and just public violence. There's a Merida employee that he allegedly hit. There's a woman whose leg he broke during a football lesson. And there was a whole issue pictured right there with the Miami-Dade police when he was arrested. He's a absolutely garbage human being, and I don't want him anywhere near this team whatsoever. I don't know if you have any thoughts on Tyreek Hill's person, his football fit,
Yeah,
any of that.
I mean, I would just say, you can, obviously he's had a collection of off-field drama and problems and issues for sure. I look at it from just a pure football on the field lens, and I don't really see the fit. I think, and we could probably even get into this when we talk about wide receivers later, but I think the Patriots need like a bigger, more traditional X kind of catch point winner for Drake May to go to. He's already got guys like Demario Douglas and Booty and like these smaller, quicker receivers. I think they need like a true big receiver, and Tyreek Hill is obviously not that. So that's not the receiver profile that I don't even think the Patriots should look at. And then you can worry about, and also we do not know medically where he is at this point. That's obviously another thing to consider when thinking about Tyreek Hill. Um, so yeah, I if I'm the Patriots, especially, I look in a different direction.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more from a football aspect, actually. I mean, pretty much everyone that I'm targeting for the Patriots are those bigger bodied receiver types. We're going to talk about a few of those guys, like you said today. Um, Before we get any further, though, we kind of touched on the recent news sort of events, and mostly because I just any opportunity that I have to trash Tyreek Hill as a person, I'm happy to do. Um, Let me just give you the opportunity to kind of introduce yourself, Anthony. Talk about, your background, what you do, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So if you don't know me, my name's Anthony Russo. I'm notoriously on X for giving my draft views and opinions on stuff. At Anthony underscore Russo 97 is my shameless plug. And yeah, I've been, I would say in the draft Twitter space now for a couple years. I've been, I've followed the draft basically since childhood, but never really like dove in deep, so to speak. In terms of like actually grading and putting together a big board and doing evaluations and things like that. So I do the Draft Professor podcast as you mentioned. I'm on there. I try to be on once a week, but sometimes other life things get in the way. And I have a Substack where I write more about the draft, and I also write about NFL and college football more broadly as well. So if you like what you hear from me today and you're somewhat interested in hearing more of my opinion, I would say my X profile is the place to find me, and I have a link to my Substack on my profile, so you can find me there.
Now, give us a little idea of what you like in a draft. Who is the first draft player that you remember falling in love with?
Wow, first one I remember falling in love with. I, whew,
And
let me think.
give me a
I
good one, like one that hit. Maybe give me one that wasn't great.
Sure. Um, Let me think. I loved Quinn Williams. I know that's not super long ago. But I remember thinking Quinnen was an absolute stud, and when the Jets drafted him, I was stoked. Um, and obviously he was always a good player. It just never really worked out in terms of on the field. Um, More recently, I was a huge Michael Penix guy. I had him QB2. I had him above Drake May and Jaden Daniels. Um, we could talk about how that aged, not necessarily well. But Penix is up there for sure. I'm trying to go back in the archives of like early draft years. Who else I or
I'll give you two of mine early on. Okay. Now this is
Sure.
going back a ways here. Uh, the first guy that I really remember just seeing him pre-draft and thinking, man, that guy's a beast. I'm really interested in learning more about the draft and learning more about that guy, Brian Arakpo.
Mm,
No, let's go back a ways. I think that was the 2011 draft. Um, Trying to look that up real quick. Draft info 2009. Sorry, 2009 draft, which makes sense.
mm-hmm.
Um, so Brian Arakpo, who I absolutely loved in that draft, I think he ended up getting drafted 13th by the Redskins at the time. And then that same draft cycle, there was a pre-draft like college all-star skills position, like competition or whatever, right? And I was watching it, and a player Ramses Barden was there, and
Yes.
now he played football. Yeah, at Cal Poly. He played football for Cal Poly. He ended up getting selected by the Giants in the third round. He didn't really pan out, but man, that guy was tall, fast, huge catch radius, big hands, caught everything. I remember just thinking, I don't know how that guy's not going to be a star in the NFL. And so that 2009 draft for me, that was the first draft that I really started diving deep into this stuff, and it really kind of caught my attention.
Yeah, and now that I'm like now thinking about it as you talked about those guys, because I would say mid 2010s is probably when I started actually like paying attention and like kind of beginning to understand how scouting worked and how again
Yeah.
like evaluations worked or whatever. I thought Amari Cooper was awesome. I loved Amari Cooper, and I still do. I still think he's one of my favorite players. Obviously, not any sort of all time great by any means, but Amari Cooper, man, I remember watching him at Bama and what he was doing, and those like, and obviously too, like Julio Jones was the run on receivers at Alabama was ridiculous at that time. But I just remember Amari Cooper, and I was like, oh yeah, this guy is a stud. And I remember too, because that was the draft with what's his name that went to Chicago. Um, um, oh
Oh,
no, Kevin White. Kevin White was the other like top receiver, and I was
oh
like,
yes, yeah, super fast guy. Yeah,
yeah, he
yeah,
was the height, weight, speed guy basically, and and
right.
Amari Cooper was more of the, also I would say fast in his own right, but route running and yak ability and things like that. That was very much the Amari Cooper aesthetic. So, and I remember thinking like, oh man, I would take Amari Cooper 1,000 times. I would take Amari Cooper over Kevin White, who I also thought was cool, but and obviously that aged well, I suppose, comparing those two. So, because I think Kevin White also, I think he was top 10, and Amari Cooper was like
Yeah, yeah,
top
he was
5.
a high selection and it's surprising too, I think at that point in time. I don't remember his exact projection, but
Mm-hmm.
he was definitely a top 10 selection and or right around 10, maybe he was like 11 or something.
Something
But
like that.
super fast, made of fine china, just broke all the time, right?
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, that was another one I was big on Amari Cooper, and that was before, again, like that was before I was doing this full on deep dive stuff. But yeah, that was one that I was like, that this is fun to watch him, see if he can live up to this hype, and
Yeah.
maybe not top 5 pick hype, but like obviously had a very solid career. So I was glad to see that.
Yeah, no, he was a very good player for a while too.
Yep.
All right, so let's moving into this combine. Let's talk some big picture combine stuff first, real quick. Because that was kind of the focus of my show yesterday, and we talked a little bit about this, and so I'd like to kind of get your perspective on some of these questions and thoughts, I guess. So, first of all, what sticks out to you as the most overrated thing every year at the combine?
There's a few answers you could have for this. I mean, I do think by and large, I think 40-yard dash, as in the totality of the 40-yard dash, is overrated. And listen, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that like I don't enjoy watching, if guys can like break the record, or like watching some 300-pound hoss break a sub 5 second time. Like, I'm
Yeah.
not gonna act like I'm above that and say that isn't awesome to watch that. These freaks of nature, but in terms of like actually evaluating and actually putting together a draft grade for a player, it's generally overrated. Now, we'll get into like the nuances and the specifics of the 10-yard split and the 20-yard split, and then the totality of the 40. What means more to certain positions and certain players and things like that. But by and large, I do think the 40-yard is more spectacle than it is, actuality. Same with the bench. Again, it's very cool to watch, these
Yeah.
hulking beasts of men, doing these absurd bench press reps, and things like that. But again, for the totality of the evaluation, it's not particularly useful. It's the whole combine is sort of a piece of the puzzle kind of thing. And I would say that those are the lesser pieces of that piece of the puzzle.
Now with the bench, what is more entertaining to you? Because maybe I'm just kind of an asshole, and that's fine. Everybody who knows me knows that's probably true. But what's more fun to you? Because it's more fun to me to watch a 300 something pound guy struggle to put up 10 reps than to watch a 300 pound something guy put up 40 something reps.
I will say too, and to that point, if there is a 300-pound man that struggles to put up 10 reps, that probably has more impact on the evaluation than a guy that is 300 pounds and does it 30 plus whatever.
Yeah.
So in that regard, I if a player has a bad combine, that usually has a bigger impact than a player that has a good combine. If they have some otherworldly combine, then you can have that conversation. But generally, that's why guys don't test, right? Like that's you
Yeah.
see plenty of top prospects not take part in the 40 and the bench and the drills and all the other stuff. That's because there's a lot more to lose if you're one of these guys that's projected to go top 15 versus these guys that are late first to like day two. They have something to gain. They have a chance to leapfrog those guys. So but yeah, I think a bad combine performance is definitely something to behold for sure.
Right on. And yeah, we can even touch on kind of the uh minutia of the 40-yard dash, if you will, because I do think it's probably the most overrated thing. It's the thing people most talk about when it comes to this event. But in some cases in some cases, depending on what position you play, your 40-yard dash time isn't even the most important thing to come out of your 40-yard dash.
Hmm.
You touched on it briefly earlier, 10-yard splits. For a while, we talked about flying 20s, and how those were important. And the ideas are surrounding the 40-yard dash itself have evolved over the course of the combine, as much as the combine itself has evolved, to be honest. As people have applied kind of sports science and that sort of stuff, and it looked deeper at these things. So I guess if you want to talk for a moment about, the importance of a 10-yard split versus a 40-yard dash, and which positions you think that, it would be more important to you to see the 10-yard split. And are there positions that it's still important to you to see the 40-yard dash time?
Yeah, so I think the obvious answer, and maybe I shouldn't say obvious because not everybody's as in tune with the combine. But I think the offensive lineman, I think you're looking for that 10-yard split. Realistically, none of your offensive linemen are going to run for any reason. Like unless they're going to go celebrate a long touchdown in the end zone. Like there's no reason that you need, Caden Proctor to run 40 yards and get a 5-1 or a 5-2 time, whatever it is, and that's going to be like the difference between him going first round or, day 2 or whatever. The 10-yard at least gives you
Yeah.
an idea of short area quickness and ability to, his first step explosion off the line, and then also, how they can navigate, trying to get to the second level for second level blocking and trying to get to the outside for, outside zone run concepts and things like that. Being able to cut off defenders' backside. Like those kinds of things matter. And those are kinds of the things. And then there are other, drills and things like that that also will, sort of add in with the 10-yard to kind of understand, that player's ability to do those things. It's a similar conversation with receivers in terms of understanding, again, their first step quickness and release off the line of scrimmage, their ability to, go from 0 to 60 and how fast they're able to become fast. I would say the 40 is more valuable for receivers and running backs and defensive backs because they have to run downfield. They have to cover larger areas in terms of, if you're a wide receiver, you're running a go route, you got to be able to at least try to outrun the defensive back you're lined up against. If you're a running back, do you have the ability to have that longer breakaway speed to run past linebackers and safeties and be able to run for long touchdowns? Um, so it's those kinds of things that do matter. I think the problem is the problem or the issue that you run into is, a lot of this can be determined on tape, and you can have a moment where you run this great, a great 40 time, but if you go back on tape and you're slow on tape when you're wearing the pads and you're in the game and you're in the moment, what do you weigh more? Do you weigh this one amazing run in a t-shirt and shorts that this guy had, or do you weigh the multiple games and the hours of tape that you have on this guy that shows you he may not be as fast as this one amazing run? So you have to weigh those things. I do, the big summation I would say is there absolutely is value in the 40. There absolutely is value in the 10 in the 10-yard split as well. But to your point, it is generally, I think, an overrated metric that is a little too pushed up in terms of value for determining where somebody should be drafted.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of the closer to the line you are, the more the 10-yard split matters because you're not really going to get that 40-yard run in the game. I mean, to your point, I don't think, Caden Proctor's ever run 40 yards in his life, probably.
Nope.
Maybe if he heard there was a donut shop around the corner. Um, but I don't think most of these offensive linemen are ever going to have to run that. Hell, we even see when you see long distance runs in the NFL, it's usually you see wide receivers, sometimes quarterbacks. In the case of Drake May this year, out there doing the lead blocking. It's not typically offensive linemen. Um, I do think there's, a lot of more conversation with like running backs. You want a good 10-yard split and a good 40. Um, but I think probably the 10-yard split might be a little bit more important because really the bulk of your running back carries are going to be within that 10 yards. The breakout plays and stuff, they're important, but they're just not that often per game. Um, I wonder what sort of thresholds do you look for in terms of either a 10 or a 40? And, how do they, obviously they change positionally. So much quicker for a wide receiver, running back, smaller players. But just positionally, say like wide receivers, what do you look for in terms of thresholds for like a 40 and for a 10-yard split?
Yeah, so and obviously too, it depends on body type. A receiver that's 5'8", 180 is gonna have a different 10 and 40-yard expectation than a 6'4", 210 receiver or
Yeah.
what have
Yeah.
you. But yeah, I would say in general, if you're sub 200 pounds and you should be at least sub 4'4". That's generally, and again, there's exceptions to the rule, but that's generally what you'd prefer. If you are one of these bigger wide receivers, a Denzel Boston, Bryce Lance kind of person, if you run a 4'4", a mid 4'4", whatever, like that's great. That's a great time. I would say like 4'5" is probably like the cutoff, so to speak, for like, okay, I'm okay with it. If the tape still shows that you have good long speed and good acceleration, I can chalk it up to like this isn't a huge deal. If we get into like the 4.6s for receivers, you either have an injury or you are there's something wrong.
Very slow.
Because you have to remember too, I think one of the things kind of people either forget or just don't really think about also is these guys are spending weeks training for these drills. It's not like you just walk in, on combine day and run the first 40 you've ever run in your life. Like they're spending weeks specifically training for the 40 and the 3 cone and all these drills. So you have to believe, at least if they've trained well, that they understand the techniques, they understand the specific style that they need to run, and how to best improve their times to the best of their ability. So if they don't do well, that shows that they either didn't train well, which kind of you would question their process, or they just aren't as fast as you thought they were. Um, and I would say either of those are a red flag for different reasons. Um, but that's kind of something to keep in mind too. It's like, why did this guy not do well? Is it medical? Is it training? Is it just actually he is what this is? So that's the thing too. Um, Speaking more on the thresholds, I would say like anytime you get a lineman, specifically a interior defensive lineman or like one of these or an offensive lineman, anytime they run a sub 5 second time is notable. Like Will Campbell last year, I think was like a 4.9
Yeah, I think it
something.
was like a 4.98 or something like that.
He
Yeah.
was, yeah, and that was fantastic. That showed that he was like I think it silenced people who said he wasn't a great athlete. I don't think athleticism was the problem with Will Campbell.
Yeah.
As a Patriots guy, I'm sure you can speak to other problems he might have had. But athleticism was not it, and I remember like I'm pretty sure he did well in the 3 cone, and he did well in the other drills as well. Um, so, but also too, like again, it's great that he ran a 4.9, but like that's not a super translatable thing. It
Right.
was how he burst off the line. I don't remember his 10 yard split offhand, but he had a great 10 yard and then just kept up that speed and that stamina throughout. Um, so I believe like what is it, like 1.3 is the time that you're looking for roundabout for the 10, something like that. If you're in that 1.3 range, I think that's what
So I have it more
teams look for.
like a 1.5.
Okay,
I think it's more
one
like a 1.4, 1.5 for the
yeah,
offensive because I
1.3 might
remember
be like,
Nolan Smith. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, Nolan
yeah. I was
Smith,
gonna,
the edge rusher that Philly took a couple years back, 152 was the edge rusher record on the 10-yard split. And then offensive line, I believe the record is Tristan Wirfs with 169. But we saw Jared Wilson, who Patriots also drafted last year, put up a 171. And Will Campbell's was a 176. So I think somewhere in the 1.7s is going to be elite. 1.8 is probably the point where you start going, I wonder if this guy can hang in the NFL. And then with the offensive skill players, I do think it's definitely a little quicker. I think it's more like
yeah, I think that's like 1.4.
1.4.
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. But
We had
yeah, and
152 out of Travion Henderson last year.
there you go. So yeah. So
Oh,
that
sorry,
that's kind of
152 out of Henderson last year. Oh, my
yeah.
bad.
There
152
you
out
go.
of Henderson last year. 151 out of A Chain. So about a 1.5 is
Yeah.
easily.
So yeah, and so yeah, again, basically though, like for offensive line and defensive line, those 10 yards are much more valuable to understanding them as a player than those 40s are. But again, it was cool to see Will Campbell run a sub 5 second time at 320 pounds, whatever he clocked
Right.
in at. So
All right. So moving along, I guess, what do you think is underrated or maybe misunderstood about the combine?
I think I kind of already touched on it, but I think kind of seeing how these guys prepare for the combine is, almost as important as what you actually get at the combine. If these guys seem prepared for these drills, and also too, the half the combine process is what we do not see. The interview
Yeah.
process, meeting with teams and agents meeting with teams and all that stuff. The value of the combine is really like being able to have these meetings with these players and these agents and these teams and determining if there's a future relationship. That's why you'll notice that a lot of the mock drafts we have now are going to be different than the ones you get after the combine, not just because of drills and testing, that's a part of it, but it's more so teams are getting very close to making final decisions on who they are comfortable taking where and who they see themselves, be wanting to draft at certain spots. Um, Obviously right now it's sort of a guessing game as to after Fernando Mendoza, who's going to go to the Jets. Um, I think we will get a clearer, maybe not necessarily a definitive answer, but I think we'll get a clearer picture of where the Jets are leaning, and who is really going to be like the favorite to be that second overall pick. Um, I think the other thing is like the position specific drills. I think have more value than the ones that we're talking about, which everybody does. One of my favorites that actually I believe has translatability is the wide receiver gauntlet drill, which I think is a relatively new addition. I think it was only added a couple years ago. But it's basically when the receiver runs in a or attempts to run in as straight a line as possible, and footballs will be thrown from each side. They have to keep turning their head to the next football and then get their hands out and make the catch. And the goal is to stay as straight a line as possible, because you don't want to like divert and get closer to make the catch easier for yourself, or I should say, get farther away and make the catch easier for yourself. So you want to stay in as straight a line as possible and consistently, get these hands catches, secure the football, things like that. So the gauntlet drill is actually one of the ones I look for specifically. And again, I think there's translatability there, being able to, turn your head as late as possible and still make a catch, being able to make a catch, period. There are multiple receivers in this draft that have drop issues. It's especially, I think, key for those guys. And again, being able to, having having the preparation to do the drill the way that it's supposed to be done. That's a big thing that I look for. I remember Troy Franklin from Oregon. I don't remember what year he was. I think he was 24. But he did not have a good gauntlet, and that made me a little worried about him. And I remember he was getting plenty of top 50 at least talk, and I think he fell a bit, and he hasn't, he's had moments, but hasn't been anywhere near a top 50 player. So that was, again, it's those little things that kind of incorporate to the whole piece of the puzzle. But that's one, and I think the 3-cone for the centers and the interior offensive linemen is a big one. There's some like ridiculous level of translation that the 3-cone drill has for centers who last long in the league. Jason Kelsey's like the ultimate example. He's like has one of the best 3-cone times ever, and now is a probable future Hall of Famer. So the 3-cone for interior offensive linemen, the gauntlet drill for the wide receivers, those are the two drills that I specifically look for.
Okay. Yeah, I we did talk yesterday a little bit, or I talked yesterday a little bit, I guess, about kind of how the things that are going to move the needle coming out of the combine aren't even as much the on-field results of testing and so forth. They're, number one, the interviews, but also how it's as much a networking event for not only media, obviously, but front office types. It's one of the few times in the year that you're going to have all 32, and I think it's 31 because I think it's the Rams that don't send anybody to this. But there is one team I know that kind of like boycotts the combine. But it's most of the NFL front office personnel and stuff like that, all in the same city. They can all sit down and have a cup of coffee together or whatever it is, and kind of talk shop and a lot of the stuff that you're going to hear out of the combine the next week is going to be A, driven by that, and then B, a reminder to my listeners from yesterday, this is where quote unquote lying season begins. And you start seeing smoke screens, you start seeing misdirects and so forth, both at press conferences and with the people you schedule interviews with. Sometimes you schedule time with guys you outright know you're not going to draft, and you're doing that specifically for the sake of opposition research or for the sake of throwing out smoke screens and miscues and misdirects and trying to make other people kind of guess who you're going to take. I think we saw a master class in that with Andrew Berry with the Cleveland Browns last year, who spent the entirety of March, telling us how great Travis Hunter was and how he couldn't wait, essentially couldn't wait to see him in the Cleveland Browns uniform. And there were all kinds of quotes out there. If he could get him and Shador, that'd be great. And da 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 da. And then he traded the pick off so that Jacksonville could take Travis Hunter, and then he bypassed Shador like 5 times till the owner forced him to take him, and allegedly, maybe, I don't know. But so there's a lot of different stuff that comes out of the combine that isn't just 40-yard dash times or even 3-cone drills or even 10-yard splits. So moving on to those position-specific drills that you were talking about, though, let's talk about the quarterback specifically and the throwing drills. I'm curious, what do you take from the quarterback throwing sessions, not only in what happens, but in who throws and who doesn't, maybe?
Yeah, so I think that's as much a talker as the actual drills themselves. I do think, by and large, I don't think the drills are that important and necessary for evaluating quarterbacks. You kind of have to remember too, like a lot of these guys we've already seen in the Senior Bowl, the Shrine Bowl, whatever bowl they've done, and then obviously there's a whole season's at least worth of game film for these guys. So these drills are again useful. Seeing the outside the hash throws to see how much velocity and spin they can put on a football is valuable. Something that teams look at. I think the big thing too is how well these quarterbacks can establish a rapport with mostly receivers that they have no prior relationship with and no prior chemistry with. It obviously helps when there's like a teammate or somebody you from like high school ball or from the bowl circuit or whatever. But mostly these quarterbacks have not thrown to these receivers, and you're trying to again establish that rapport and trying to figure out timing and things like that. So it's useful to see who's able to do that the fastest and the most successfully. In terms of like who's gonna throw, that's always sort of the $1 million question. I think one of the silver linings, I guess you could say, of a quote unquote bad quarterback class is a lot of these guys have a lot to gain by throwing and by doing the drills and by doing the 40 and all these other things. There's not a lot of top guys that are able to sit out and they can rest on, well, I'm going to definitely be a top 10 pick. The only one is probably Fernando Mendoza. Maybe Ty Simpson sits out. I could see that, I guess, but I generally think that even the guys that are in contention for QB 3, 4, and 5 are gonna test because they kind of need it. I like Cole Payton, for example, from North Dakota State. He's starting to get the QB 2/3 chatter, and there's no doubt that he tests because he needs to show how athletic he is, how much he can translate to an NFL offense, and that the combine will help again just show him off more to teams that are interested. So I will be interested to see if Mendoza and Simpson test. I'm not really expecting either. Simpson would be more likely. But the drills themselves, again, I don't think are huge. I will say, I brought up Michael Penix before, And one of the things that I enjoyed about Michael Penix was he had a very good combine. And I do think that at least helped get him to being a top 10 pick when, I said he should have been a top 10 pick, but a lot of people were not expecting Michael Penix to go 8 to Atlanta. So, like that, I do think the combine can
Number one
help.
among them being Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, Kirk Cousins did not appreciate his combine performance as much as I did, for sure. But it's those little things that like can be the difference. Again, I mentioned how the combine is a piece of the puzzle. If you're separating these guys by, you know, the slightest of metrics or the slightest of differences in accuracy and arm strength or whatever, and then you see them at the combine and you're like, you know what? I'm sold. This is my guy. That could be the difference. And that could be the difference between being a first round pick or being a day 2 pick, or at the very least, like being a top 10 pick versus later first round. Like, these things do add up, even if not in a super, grandiose way. So yeah, I wouldn't take a lot from the drills specifically, but they are worth watching. And who stands out, especially in this class, to try to become that third or second quarterback taken, I think is what teams are going to be watching it to figure out.
Yeah, and I think there can be some, speaking specifically of Cole Payton that you just mentioned, some benefit in some of these talent evaluators, especially general managers, front office types. I often hear scouts talk about the benefit of seeing a guy throw live versus just watching him on TV. And when you get some of these smaller school prospects, like a Cole Payton, for instance, that some of these guys may not have actually gotten to a game in person, seeing him throw live in person can add a little bit to his evaluation that you just don't get from reading a paper or even watching a video. I think there are also sometimes that you'll get college prospects in here, like for instance Jackson Dart last year, right? Lane Kiffin's system seems to me to be, and I'm not a expert in the X's and O's, if you will, but it seems to me to be one of those things where it's tough often to translate a quarterback from college to the pros. And I think some of these drills give you the opportunity to see them have to make throws that they weren't asked to do in college. I'm wondering if you can think of any specific college coaches, college systems, or colleges that it's like, I want to see this guy at the combine, or I want to see this guy maybe at the Senior Bowl or whatever, because I didn't get to see a lot of NFL stuff out of him at the college level. And I need to see that before I can really feel good about him.
Yeah, I mean, the first offense that comes to mind, and they don't, well, time will tell if they have a prospect in this draft or not, but like the Tennessee offense, I think is one, and that also speaks to, we've had this run of Tennessee wide receivers for a couple of years now, and Chris Brazzell will be in this class, and that whole passing offense is, it's very much predicated on quick and easy reads and just throwing to, one guy is meant to get open and you're going to throw it to him and that's it. So if, again, if Joey Aguilar is still fighting for eligibility at this point, so I don't even know if he's going to be in this draft, but that was the conversation with Nico Iamaleava before he transferred, was will the Tennessee offense actually help him elevate and get better and develop and become a top quarterback prospect, because physically there wasn't any question. I think it's also, you brought up Ole Miss, obviously. Matt Corral is one of my bigger misses in recent years. I thought he would be actually a pretty solid starter for a team, and not, I didn't, I had like a day 2 grade on him. I didn't have him first round or anything, but I thought he was the second best quarterback in that class behind Kenny Pickett. So, and obviously that didn't work out. I think he's in the UFL now. So that remains to be seen. And listen, I do think there is a reasonable conversation to be had about what Indiana's offense was. it was heavily predicated on RPOs and quick. Mendoza would do a lot of back shoulder throws and a lot of just not required to go through as many progressions as say like a Ty Simpson was at Alabama. Now I still obviously I have Mendoza QB1 and I think that he has the smarts and the intangibles to make up for those things. But I think that is a if you're not someone who believes Mendoza should be first overall necessarily, I think that's a question you have about their offense.
Well, I think there's a lot of quarterbacks these days in college that it seems like they just barely even throw it all sometimes. I think of like a Haynes King at Georgia Tech this year, who was such a running threat that you'll get a lot of times where these throwing drills can actually make a little bit of an impact there for talent evaluators. Now, do you think that the combine matters more or less for quarterbacks specifically than for other players?
I would say less in general. Again, there are obviously parts of it that matter for a quarterback. And there are things to take away from the combine. I can't talk about quarterbacks in the combine and not think of. I mean, I know this was his pro day, but like the Zach Wilson throw, and again that was his pro day. It's obviously different, but these moments of like quarterback excellence where like Joe Milton when he threw that I think he threw like a 60-yard or 70-yard bomb and everybody was obsessing and then he still wound up going 4th round. We can be impressed by like these marvels of throws that we see at the combine and pro days or whatever. But again, like I don't take a lot away from it. I do think it's more just for quarterbacks it's about establishing a rapport with teams that could be interested in you, and teams, deciding that this is a guy that we want in our building, as long as we like the tape and the tape matches up to what we saw at the combine. That would convince a team. So no, but by and large, I don't think quarterback is that crucial to the combine.
Yeah, it's fun. To me, it's prospects that star at the combine. They kind of make me think of like a big life thing where it's like dudes that like peak in high school. Like it's like great, that's your best day, and then from there on, it's going to be downhill usually. Anyway, I mean, you'll see a lot of these workout warriors that they come in there, they get all the hype, and then it's really never the same for them. You see some exceptions to that, like Nicky Manwari from last year's combine stands out to me. Moving right along though, because we've got to get through this. We've got about 48 minutes in. We aim to be out of here by an hour. We'll see what we can do. But running backs, they do a number of different drills, movement drills. Obviously, pass catching drills are going to be important, and pass protection drills, I think, are a little bit underrated. We talked a little bit already about the 40-yard dash versus the 10-yard split and the importance here, particularly with which kind of running back you are really. What drills matter most to you when evaluating running backs?
So yeah, I mean, I think you touched on it. I think the pass protection drills matter. Especially with running backs, there are most running backs that are drafted are trying to carve out a role, right, in an offense, whether that is as a pass catcher on 3rd down or a early down, bigger bruising back kind of, or short yard kind of back, or a guy that can stick on 3rd down as a pass protector. Like, that's what a majority of the running backs that are going to get drafted are trying to do, is just find a spot, find a place in an NFL offense. And these drills help figure out, like, okay, my team has, a true 3-down back, like a Saquon or a Derrick Henry or a Bijan or whoever, but a guy that can come in and, again, be that 3rd down passing outlet, or it can be that sort of change of pace back for a team. That's that matters. That matters to teams a lot. It matters in roster building and things like that. So these drills I do think matter. I definitely, again, like pass protection can be a difference maker between, you can have two guys that run fast 40s and, have good builds on them and things like that. But if one can pass protect and one can't, who's getting drafted. So those things do matter. I think the drills, again, like the movement drills and the change of direction drills matter. But I think, if it doesn't match up to the tape, then, you're going to have a reason to go back and watch as to whether or not, okay, again, is this like a guy just doing well in a drill, or is this like a higher end ability to change direction that I just didn't give him enough credit for? So those things matter, but yeah, I think pass protection is absolutely an underrated one too.
Yeah, I mean, pass protection gets you reps, and reps get you opportunity. Is kind of what I always say, and that's really what you want from a young player. Also, special teams value the ability to contribute in the return game. That'll earn you a roster spot. And having a roster spot will earn you the opportunity, earn you the reps. To talk specifically about a few players here, real quick, give me a real quick compare and contrast between Katron Allen. Sorry, I live in a petting zoo. Between Katron Allen and Jonah Coleman. These are two players that I see similarly. They're kind of similarly built. I'm interested in both of them potentially for the Patriots. We had a lot of red zone issues last year, and I think a player like this could help clear some of those things up. So if you could just compare and contrast those two guys for a moment.
Yeah, for sure. So both are, you said, kind of similar builds. I think Coleman is shorter and stockier. He's like 5'9", 225, something like that. And Katron Allen, I think, is like 5'10" or 11 and like 215. So both of them kind of have like this sort of, you'll hear like a bowling ball physique. But I think Coleman is definitely more of that. Coleman, for me, I think has a little just more athleticism, a little more ability to change direction. Neither one of them are particularly, elusive, in a special kind of way. But I think Coleman showed like he can be a little more light on his feet, particularly out in open space. And again, can make those, can put his foot in the ground, make a cut, make a guy miss. I don't think that's Allen as much. I think Allen is more of like a will run you over bruiser kind of guy. And Coleman can do that too. He's absolutely a big bruiser kind of guy. But I think Coleman has, again, more just natural athleticism. I also think he offers more as a pass catcher. And it's not to say that Katron Allen can't, but he was teammates with Nick Singleton, who I think is like the premier pass catching running back in this class. So, he was did not, that they were not asking Katron Allen to be a pass catcher, whereas Jonah Coleman was able to get a little more reps in the screen game and on quick routes and things like that. So I have Coleman higher. Coleman is my RB2. And Allen, I will briefly look, I think is like RB 11 or 12. Yeah, he's around that range. So I have Coleman as like a day 2, a solid day 2 pick, and Katron Allen for me is more of like a day 3 guy. But yes, in terms of like for the Patriots, could definitely have similar roles, as sort of that Ramondre Stevenson replacement kind of bruiser early down guy, and then if you have Trevion as your third down primary pass catcher option, I definitely could see the vision with that, but I think Coleman is the better player.
I think that the pass catching drills in route running, receiving sort of drills that running backs run at this event can help guys like a Katron Allen or like a Jadarian Price at Notre Dame, who also saw fewer opportunities in the passing game, due to the presence of Jeremiah Love there. So being able to show that, yes, in fact, we do have hands can help these guys where they just didn't have that opportunity in college. Next group of running backs, we got three other guys here that just give us your thoughts real quick on these three guys. Robert Henry Jr. out of UTSA, Mike Washington out of, I didn't write him that, or Emmett Johnson down. I should have wrote down the college, but Mike Washington and Emmett Johnson.
Yeah, so Robert Henry Jr. is one of my running back sleepers. He's either just outside or just inside my top 100. I think he made the cut. But he is an explosive back from UTSA. He sort of burst on the scene in week 1 against Texas A&M, which obviously is a top SEC defense against a mid-major school like UTSA. And he gashed them for 177 yards on the ground. He is explosive. He has legit home run speed and potential. He's not the biggest guy. He's 5'9", 205. So, not any sort of, big physical kind of back. But if you let him, he has great vision. If he's able to find the hole and, again, just explode through it, I think he's a really talented back, and I think also can be a contributor in passing situations. I just don't think I think the team saw that he ran for 177 yards against Texas A&M and said, why would we ever not give him the ball as a running back? They wasn't a big part of the passing game, but I think he's got some receiving chops. Mike Washington is the definition of just a physical unicorn, if you will. He's like 230 pounds, but is probably going to run like a 4.4. I've heard even people float that he could run a 4.3, which I think is absurd, and I don't think that's going to happen. But if he runs anywhere in the 4.4s at 230 pounds, I think you are pleasantly and majorly surprised and happy with that. But he's another one. He's got explosiveness and true home run ability, but the difference is he's 230 pounds and is able to be physical as well and can run through guys with contact balance and things like that. His big problem is fumbling. He has a major fumble problem that all throughout the season, and he needs to clean that up. Fumbles are an absolute killer. You talked about guys just trying to get on the field and get reps. Fumbles are a great way to not get on the field and get reps. So you got to be able to work on that. But from a physical standpoint, he's got everything you want. And then Emmett Johnson was a guy I liked in the summer. Had his coming out party this year at Nebraska, but flashed some really good passing down ability. I think of the three in this group, he's the most sound as a pass catching option and a guy that can get downfield and run routes and work the short passing game and the intermediate passing game as much as sort of behind the line of scrimmage. But I'm going to sound like a broken record, but again, super fast home run speed ability. I think his change of direction as well of the three guys that we're talking about is probably the best. A natural mover in space. So he's an exciting player. His size is going to be another concern for teams. He's right around that 200 mark. He's probably sub 200 pounds, like 190 something and like 5'11". So he's not going to check the boxes from a physical and size standpoint. But he could do some special things with the ball in his hands.
Okay. All right, we're going to move right along to the wide receivers. We're hitting an hour now, so we're going to have to speed through these guys. But wide receivers, there's a few things that pop off to me as important at this combine, starting with measurements. Arm length, which obviously helps indicate catch radius. How much space does a quarterback have to put the ball where you can reasonably catch it? Height obviously helps, show in jump ball situations and improve your catch radius and so forth. And an underrated thing I think is hand size. the ability to catch the ball, obviously, is heavily impacted by hand size. You often hear a lot of people talk about 40s, height, arm length, whatever. They don't bring up the hand size, and sometimes that can be a key indicator, both positively and negatively. I think in this particular class, we have two guys that stand out to me. Skylar Bell, on the smaller side physically, real big hands, 10 plus inch hands. Whereas the converse of that, Malachi Fields, about 6'4, 220, real big and imposing physically, good catch radius, good in contested catch situations, and very small hands. Something like 8 3/4 inch hands, which is very small for a guy his size. Um, as far as the kind of metrics, the explosive metrics, the vertical jump is going to help give you some indicators in terms of contested catches. The broad jump, and then the hands drills. You had already talked about the one earlier. I always think about Lad McConkey running it for whatever reason.
Yes.
But that gauntlet where I think they run it down to 50 typically, and it's from sideline to sideline, and they hit you with like 10 passes or something like that in those times. So I know that one's important to you. What do you think? Just talk about what pops off as key to you for wide receivers at this level.
Yeah, so on the measurements front, I was the guy last year that when Tez Johnson's measurements came in, that he was 160 something pounds and like 5'7" or whatever, or 5'8", 5'7", whatever he was, and then he ran a 4.5 something. I was out. I said I have him as a UDFA now. I was hoping he would put on more weight and more muscle, and didn't. And and obviously I had a couple moments this year, but I don't know long term what we're gonna see out of him. But that's where it matters for me. If you're one of these outliers trying to make an impact, I think that's where the height weight measurables really matter, and the arm length you talked about, and the hand size you talked about as well. By and large, we kind of know like what these guys are. We have a lot of verified measurements already from earlier in the year. We have a lot of measurements from the Senior Bowl and the other bowl games already. So most players aren't really going to like be a surprise to anyone. But I think these, when you put it all together in terms of like forming a physical profile, watching them do these drills and then understanding what their height and weights are, that matters. I do think I talked about the gauntlet before. I think that's the wide receiver drill that I think matters the most to me. And to your point too, like the vertical and broad jumps matter in determining, again, like kind of that explosiveness, how much power and strength you have in your lower body. And obviously too, if you're a guy that is particularly for a bigger wide receiver, if you're this guy that's going to try to make a living on 50-50 balls and try to win, be a red zone guy and try to win contested, being able to jump high and being able to time jumps, it matters. So that can matter too as well. But I'd say overall, the measurements themselves aren't the biggest thing, because you're again, you already kind of have an idea of what these guys are, but it's matching up the measurements to the profile. And I said it before too, Bryce Lance at 209 pounds, whatever, running a 4.4 is a lot different than if Brendan Thompson ran a 4.4. Like it's the same time, but it's two completely different players and projections. So that's where you kind of have to all put it all together. But I also do agree, like hand size is an underrated metric as well, particularly if you have a guy that has like a drop problem. If he has smaller hands, it might sound stupid to some people, but like that does matter. That does matter, and there is translatability there. So I wouldn't just deride it as oh well, a guy can't be good because his hands are under 9 inches or whatever. That there's a reason we have these metrics, and there's a reason that we have these standards that scouts look for.
Well, and there are exceptions to every rule. Don't get me wrong, but it doesn't mean that every exception is that exception to the rule.
Right.
It means that you've got to show us in other ways. We've got to go back to the tape. We've got to look at some things and so forth. I've got these guys kind of broken out. The guys I'm interested in kind of broken out into different buckets, and I'm going to chop us down to two of them just in the interest of time. I'm going to say bigger bodied wide receivers. All right. Take one of these guys and tell me who you think has the most out of these guys to prove at the combine. All right. Denzel Boston, Malachi Fields, Caleb Douglas, Ted Hurst, and Chris Brazzell. For me, I think Brazzell, because he didn't do any of these pre-combine sort of all-star events. I think it kind of gave guys like Malachi Fields and Ted Hurst the opportunity to pass him in a lot of people's minds, just in terms of what have you done for me lately, or what have you done in front of my eyes lately perspective. And I think Brazzell's got to go out there and run up blazing speed and remind everybody of his physical gifts. Who stands out to you in that group?
Yeah, I'd say on that list, I think I'd probably say Malachi Fields, and the Brazzell argument makes sense. Like we have seen Malachi Fields at the Senior Bowl, obviously, and had a great Senior Bowl. But I've never seen the long speed and the athleticism with him. And now I'm seeing. I mean, Daniel Jeremiah literally just put him first round to the Bills in his mock draft. I think we are maybe jumping the gun, jumping the shark, whatever the saying is, a little bit on Malachi Fields. But that said, if he goes out and he's probably going to come in at like 6'4", 215, 210-ish, and if he runs a 4.4 and does well in these drills and shows more athleticism than I am giving him credit for, he probably does jump into like late round 1, early round 2 conversations. So Malachi Fields of those 5 is the one I'm least confident in their athleticism and their just long speed and things like that. So he would be the one that I would watch to see if he can stack up with like a Chris Brazzell and a Ted Hurst and guys like that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, because I think a lot of people would expect Malachi to go out there and run like a 4.5, 4.55 type of speed. And if he can go out there and throw up something in the mid 4.4s even, it's going to open up a few eyes. Okay, he's gonna have really aced this pre-draft process so far. The next bucket that I'll talk about, and I've only got 2 names in this bucket that jumped out at me. You could throw another one in if you want, or you could run with one of these guys. Lesser known, under the radar guys, all right, and specifically Bryce Lance and Caden Wetjen out of Iowa. He kind of made a little bit of a name for himself at the Shrine Bowl, I believe. So yeah, which one of those guys really jumps out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't take a chance to talk about Bryce Lance. I'm not just saying this because I've been the Bryce Lance guy since last summer. I genuinely believe Bryce Lance could be the quote-unquote winner of the combine, at least at the wide receiver position. I think he is going to run a 4.4 and is going to have those bigger measurables like 6'3", 209, 207 is kind of where he's been ballparked at. But I think he's going to show off the speed and he's going to show off the hands in the drills. I expect him to test as at least like top 3 among the wide receiver position. So I'm very excited for him. Wetjen, really, I had never gotten eyes on him until the Shrine Bowl, where he kind of burst onto the scene as like, he's running some good routes and making some nice catches. He was at Iowa, an offense not known for producing receivers. They are not a passing friendly offense, so I think that was kind of part of the reason. If you look at his production, it's not good, but I don't think that's really because he's not good. I think it was just as much, if not more, that Iowa just wasn't throwing the ball, and when they throw the ball, it's usually to the tight ends. So he has a very good chance to again kind of build on that Shrine Bowl performance and test well. And you mentioned guys that are going to carve out like returner roles in the NFL. definitely think he's a contender for that, and then potentially getting on the field as like a wide receiver 4 option. He definitely has the chops for that. And one quick name I'll throw in, Chris Hilton Jr. from LSU. He has played at every single bowl game this season. He started at the Hula, then went to American Bowl, then went to the Shrine Bowl, then went to the Senior Bowl, and now he's at the Combine. And I think he is a very talented receiver. He has been derailed by injuries for his entire collegiate career, but there is a reason LSU wide receivers, there's a lot of them in the NFL these days, and have been for some time. They know how to find the talent, and they know how to develop them. If Chris Hilton can stay healthy, I think he could be a very steal at the wide receiver position, and I think he's another one that can test really well come April, and teams will be more willing to forgive the injury history if they could see how talented he is.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. He not exactly a small school guy, but certainly a limited opportunity guy who's going to be able to kind of get out there in front of evaluators and cameras and so forth. All right, we're really up against it, so you know what? Let's just because we've gone over by a significant amount now. Why don't you give me one tight end you're going to keep an eye out for there at the Combine, and somebody who can affect their draft stock in your mind.
I'll say Sam Roush, tight end from Stanford. He's my tight end too.
Guy.
I don't think. Yeah. He was another one. He had a great Senior Bowl. Well, no, I shouldn't say great. He had an okay Senior Bowl. But I think all the tight ends kind of struggled for some reason. But I still have him as tight end too. He was a guy that I think in a draft class where there's a lot of undersized tight ends, he's not. He is 6'5", 259, checks the boxes in terms of the ideal size that you want in a tight end, and I think he's got good blocking chops, but I also think he can get down the field and win, particularly in the short and intermediate game. He's not going to be a seam stretcher kind of guy, but he's a contributor in the passing game and contributor as a blocker, and if he could test well and at least show plus athleticism, which I think he can and will, I think teams will buy in that this is somebody that can at least be a tight end that can stay on the field in a variety of different situations, which is hard to say about most of the tight ends in this class.
Yeah, I mean, then that goes to what we've continued to talk about a couple times on this broadcast here, which is earning reps earns you opportunities. And being able to stay out there on the field is a big part of that. I'm a big Sam Roush fan here. A lot of the pass catchers struggled down there in Mobile. It's almost like we have a class of terrible quarterbacks. So, all right. Well, listen, we're going to get out of here. Look, I'd like to thank you so much for your time, Anthony. Sorry we went over a little bit here. We look forward to seeing you on some more episodes of the Draft Professors and perhaps back here in the future. We'd definitely love to have you. We enjoyed having you for this episode. Guys watching and watching this after the fact, please leave your comments and questions. Tell us where you think we got it right, where you think we screwed it up. Right in the comments there. We'll, I interact with every comment that I see out there. And thanks so much for your time, Anthony.
Of course. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate coming on.
All right. You want to just one last time, where people can find your stuff?
Yeah, for sure. On X at Anthony_Russo97, on the Draft Professor podcast, and on my Substack, which you can find in my X bio.
All right, great. All right, everyone, have a great day. We'll be back here. I'll be back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I'm going to bring in on another guest, and we're going to talk about the trenches. Have a great day, folks.